Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us tonight for our weekly town hall, Smart Justice during COVID-19. My name is Sean Wilson. I'm the statewide organizer for the campaign for Smart Justice. Tonight, we're joined by a special guest, my brother from another mother, Dr. Kwaku Ramel Smith, licensed psychologist, television host, author, educational consultant, keynote motivational speaker. He conducts workshops and seminars on trauma, anger management, diversity, inclusion, in performance team building. This brother is indeed the total package. His reputation precedes him, and we're going to have a conversation tonight about mental health during this COVID-19. And so, Dr. Smith, I'll allow you to say a few things about yourself that you want our viewers to know, if you don't mind. But before you do that, I know that the world in the Black community in particular is dealing with the killing of George Floyd. So I just want to momentarily take space and acknowledge, this brother's death and this brother's life, because this is a constant reality for Black men and Black people here in America. So for the Black men who are viewing this, what are some things that we can implement to deal with the trauma that we witnessed yesterday and as a result of the perpetual onslaught on our lives? So could you just speak to that just momentarily before we delve into mental health in this moment?
Yeah, and even before we do that, let's just take a minute of silence for Brother Floyd and his family, just to give him that love, that respect. Ashe. Before I speak, I always like to give respect to the ancestors whose shoulders I stand upon. Before I speak, I always try to see whose spirit I want to invoke to be able to come. Tonight, I like to invoke the spirit of Brother Adam Clayton Powell Jr., that great congressman out of New York City. So many different things he did that some people love, some people didn't. But one thing he was unapologetically for his people, unapologetically, unafraid to speak truth to power. But not only did he talk the talk, he made sure he walked the walk by moving legislation. He helped set the door for the Martin Luther Kings, for the James Farmers, for all of those who came after him. So with that power and that spirit, I say these words. Now, to your point, I tell people whenever we deal with mental health, and I know you didn't want to just go there, but I think we have to accomplish this. When we deal with that, specifically as a person of African descent, you look at the historical trauma that you dealt with. So that's trauma that's just in your DNA from when you're born, the pain that comes in. I'm not talking about the societal issues that comes from, having jobs and employment and capitalistic gains taken away from your family so that you could progress in the regular American capitalistic society. But I'm talking about just that demeanor of not feeling human, of being dehumanized, of being otherized, of being marginalized. We got to deal with that from the beginning. So we got this historical trauma that's in our bones. The great actor Denzel Washington, who portrayed that great movie Fences, he talked about that scene which he was the father, and he said every father has hurt and pain upon him that even unconsciously, when he wants to do the right thing, he unconsciously revisits those upon his child, and those are things that's put over. And even though we try to become better every generation, those are obstacles we have to deal with. Now, that's not to say that nobody else has these type of historical pains, because plenty of people do. But when we look specifically within the context of the African race, there's no place anywhere in the history where a people have been held captive and didn't live with their captors in the essence. So now you're dealing with historical trauma. Then you come to just regular trauma that we all receive as human beings. So now you're dealing with like, hey, I got the stresses of life. I want to succeed. I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good wife. I want to be a good father, a good mother, just those things. I want to excel in education. We all deal with life and death. These are the things that unites us and binds us as human. We all have those regular kind of current traumas in life. But then we have these extra issues. If you're a Black man, if you're from a marginalized group, an otherized group, and that could even sometimes come with being a female, sometimes with low SES. But when you put all of those together, none out you as much as the hue of your skin, where your skin can be weaponized against you. So we look at what Wisconsin did. They actually led the way with recognizing racism as a public health crisis and concern. So when you have public health issues, these are things that exacerbate any mental health issue. But now, to your point right now, Brother Sean, we also deal with not only historical trauma, the current traumas of regular trauma, and then racism as that trauma, but then we deal with what we call anticipatory trauma. What's this anticipatory trauma? Trauma that ain't even happened, but I'm afraid to happen. Bow your heads every time I say something that's true. You hear a black mama say, I'm afraid for my son to leave. You hear a black man say, man, when the police light them cherries and berries, come on, man, even if I ain't did nothing right, my heart is beating and whatnot like that. See, this anticipatory trauma is then validated when we see Ahmaud Arbery, man, running, just jogging, doing this thing, trying to stay healthy within the midst of a COVID. One of the things that we would suggest you do, and because his skin was weaponized, guess what happened? He became that individual who was then killed. It was to our horror. And then seeing that it was 2 other people that was killed before that, but then we get another one even more grotesque in nature. And what made this one even more horrific with the mod, you can say these was 2 regular citizens. One was a former cop, but he was retired, maybe still had some residue from the vicarious trauma that most police officers carry. And they unloaded this on this innocent man. But when we look at yesterday and what happened with Brother Floyd, and we hear everybody talk about him being a gentle giant, being a loving man. And for one, we don't even know what crime he committed. If at the worst what they say is true, the felonious thing that goes in with plagiarizing, with making a fraudulent check and whatnot like that, we ask ourselves, was that enough for death? Was it that was it worth that level of trauma? And to know, this is the scary part, Brother Kimmy. This is the scary part. When you can know that the people who are supposed to protect and serve, the people who are there to care for you, are the very people who will take your life, be judge, jury, and executioner. But not just that, under the cloak of secrecy and darkness. This was done in broad daylight, knowing that a camera was on. So what that says is, guess what? I don't care what you say. I don't care what you think. I'm going to let you see this in real time, and we're going to allow this to happen. Now, this is the crazy part, Brother Sean. Peep this. Over Memorial Day weekend, we had mass shootings here in Milwaukee. There was 49 shootings in Chicago. 10 people were killed. But we saw people filming this. Nobody went to their rescue. And I'm talking about Black people. Because what? They were afraid of what to do. And that's part of the trauma as far as going against the person who's your oppressor. Now, we see this person committing a crime. Now, let's just go back to Ahmaud Arbery. We had 2 citizens say, we think somebody stole something, so we're going to make a citizen arrest. Let's just say the premise was sincere. I doubt it was, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. As citizens, they saw something wrong. They wanted to do something right. We understand the Good Samaritan law. If you see something wrong, say something. It's not snitching if you're helping the community. These people, now they did film to be able to get that, but they saw a murder going on live, but they were paralyzed. They were frozen. And it wasn't just a fear. It was something that had been indoctrinated inside of the mind that won't let you go against a person. It's almost like a sci-fi movie when you see a person who want to attack somebody, but it's a mind control and they're going, but they can't for some reason and they don't understand it. That's the sickness of the indoctrination that goes all the way from the historical trauma, from the legacy of slavery. So now as we go to that, you say, well, how am I supposed to deal with this? Because now we're looking at life is just difficult as it is. Then you add COVID-19 and you see how it exacerbates its death effect on those from the Latinx community, from the Black community. But now we still got to deal with these other regular eccentric horrors where we say, is this not enough to deal with? And what this does is it puts you in a mind state where you're unstable, where you're not thinking right, where you will do something that doesn't make good sense. So like when we see what happened with the individuals in Minnesota later last night, who could deny that? And most people misquote King when they say that because they don't say the rest of his thing. But when he said the riot is the voice of the unheard, King was saying, I don't agree with that. He said, but if you don't listen to people, if you're not understanding what people think needs to be understood and you don't correct these things and they see this duplicitous law system, they see this 2-tiered system, guess what? You're going to get the worst reaction. And it's not so much the worst reaction, it's a good human reaction. Why do we respect Crispus Attucks the way he do? Because he was the first person to take a bullet to try to get what the independence of America from the British. Why do we respect Patrick Henry so much? Because he said, gosh darn it, no taxation without representation. Give me liberty or give me death. The change the British has us in is unbearable. No man should do this. And this is the real part right here, because this leads us into what we're talking about tonight with the ACLU, and we start talking about imprisonment. A few years ago, there was a financial show done on PBS. And what they said is that the average American, if there was an emergency of $400, they would be in trouble. 40% of Americans. Think about that. Now, everybody wanted, flash a nice car and flash nice clothes and everything like that, but nobody really knows what goes on in anybody's pocketbook. So now when we start saying, hey, this is trouble, and that same story, they say, guess what? 20% of the people can only go 3 days without a check. They said a little bit more after that can go 3 weeks. Now we start to think about what happened at Madison, when we started to see what happened across America, when it was liberate our states. People had been locked up in their house, not locked up just like in a prison, locked up in the comfort and with the amenities of their house. And you know what they were saying? I can't take this no more. I got to get out. And what happened? We saw people with AR-15s, with 9mm, with all type of other assault weapons, saying, we're walking up in our boldness and our privilege to the state capitol. We dare you to say something. We dare you to do something. Even in the midst of a pandemic, we will not respect your social distancing laws. We will not respect your face mask. We will not respect any of the rules that you give. You're going to open up our state. We'd rather die than be in prison. And this is the irony of people always wanting to be tough on crime and lock people up. When they got a small taste of it, they were ready to rebel. But see, that's the difference between a free mind and a chained mind. See, the free mind, even though I don't agree with what they did, I respect the mess out of it, because they said, no, I'm not dealing with this. You look at Frederick Douglass, he said, power can seize nothing without a demand. He said, now things can change either by words or by blows or by both. But he said, tyrants will only do what you allow them to do. They see what limit that the people who they are oppressing will allow them to do, and they don't go over that limit, because they know if they go over, they got trouble. That's why you start to see states reopening, even though we didn't meet the guidelines of the Badger Bounce Back Plan. We didn't meet the guidelines of the president and the White House, in which they suggested that the scientists had put out, because they knew if we didn't do it, it was going to be issues. The question is, why wasn't the National Guard, why wasn't the militia sent out with those individuals who were protesting with their right, even though they didn't get the permit, so they really were illegal? Why was no National Guard with weapons, with all types of SWAT gear there for them? But when you see peaceful protests within certain communities, people are loaded up, ready to go and attack as though they're in war condition. And that leads us into the question, what we're talking about today. The whole imprisonment, this whole COVID has exposed, just like it exposed some of the health disparities within certain marginalized and vulnerable communities, it has exposed how horrific our non-rehabilitative incarceration system is. They might as well call it a prison again, because it's not a correctional facility. So as we go with that, that's my start for today. I'm just starting. You see I'm sweating, I'm ready to go. But we're going to get into that today.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was powerful. And I assure you our viewers appreciate that, because that has been at the forefront of many of their minds, and has been a conversation starter throughout throughout the day, throughout the today. I've seen it on social media. I myself have had multiple conversations and been involved in text threads, just unpacking all of this that has happened in the last day. And, going to our incarcerated brothers and sisters who are currently incarcerated in the midst of a global pandemic. And I assure you that many of them would rather have liberty, are pretty much saying, give me liberty or give me death, because they don't want to die in prison. You know what I mean? They don't want to die as a result of being exposed to a virus. And of course that affects, their mental, that affects their family's mental, because they're worried about what is happening to their loved ones while they're out here, when they're seeing people are literally dying every day as a result of being exposed and contracting this virus. So I'm wondering, what are some things, what are some resources that family members can pass along to their incarcerated loved ones that will help them get through this global pandemic? They're not able to, grab their weapons and march up to the Capitol and scream and shout down the governor and our state legislators. So what are some resources that family members can share with their loved ones to cope during this time?
Yeah, this is the toughest question, because when you're given a question, you really want to have an answer that can give people hope, that can give people, shovel-ready interventions that they can implement and employ, and you can see results. But if we're being absolutely honest, anybody who's ever been in prison, who's worked in a prison, who's been deeply connected with prison, you understand the injustices that go there on a regular basis. And when I say injustices, it's not only to those who are incarcerated, but also who work there. From the psychology world, you got to look at the Stanford experiment with prisons. And this was a thing where they got college students together. And I'm going to get to your question, Brother Sean. They got 10 people on each side. They said, we don't know who's going to be the guards or who's going to be the inmates. Well, what happened was they got 10 guards and 10 inmates, and they told the guards, hey, do you. Be you a guard. And what they found out is that these normally subdued Stanford students, which is, one of the prestigious intellectual places you could be, the study was so bad they had to shut it down because it became unethical. But what they recognized is that these guards started to take on a mentality of this power, and they started to abuse it. Now, if they had to take this down in just a matter of weeks, less than 2 weeks, imagine what it is to be a security person for 2 years, for 4 years, for 8 years. And this goes like with our police officers, what we're saying, the secondary trauma, the vicarious trauma that they get for doing that on a regular basis is very difficult. So you look inside of the conditions of a correctional facility, and they're horrific. I don't care if you in a maximum or medium, just being locked up one time, because let's think about it. Prisons was created for 3 reasons. The first was if somebody did something wrong, was to remove you from society. But the second was to rehabilitate you, because you were going to be reintegrated into society as a whole citizen. And the third was to deter other people to say, hey, I don't want to go there. But somehow along in our way, we made prison a punishment. It wasn't rehabilitative. So now when we have people in there, and I know this because I worked within the prisons. I worked in juvenile corrections. I worked in adult corrections. I worked in young adult corrections where we had men and women. And what you see is 2 worlds. Let's take MSDF, for example. Beautiful building on the outside. And you look at it, it looked like it could be a high rise for the Jeffersons. But what you recognize is a building inside of a building. And those that trapped inside of that building never get out for exercise, never get out for fresh air, never get out for fresh light. And in fact, the beautiful building is a facade because it's a building inside of a building. So you never get any natural sunlight, any natural fresh air. So being in there for 2 weeks, being in there for 3 weeks, being in there for a year and a half, it starts to play tricks on your mind. It starts to do different things with you. So now let's go back to your question. What can we do in the midst of this COVID? Well, let's think about what's really happening, because people can't get visits. They're not getting all of their supplies. And because people are still lumped up on each other, there's no way they can control for that. I worked at MSDF when we had MRSA, and it was only about like 6 or 7 of individuals who had it, but the prison was scared, and it was like, how do we keep them secluded? How do we keep them there? And so I'm saying, like, man, if this would happen just for every level, we'd be in trouble. So the absolute honest truth is, what can we do? You can send them love, because everybody needs love and hope to know somebody is there caring and praying for you. But a book is not going to do it. A love just in itself in words is not going to do it. We need action, and we need not only action from the families, Brother Sean, we need actions from everybody who consider themselves to be an ally. But more importantly, we need everybody who now understands what it feels like to be locked up, to become a voice and an advocate for those, because this is not going to stop with just the families, because they're not even looked at with respect. They say you're making excuses for somebody who doesn't deserve these type of things. We look somehow at people who have been incarcerated as less than human beings. And that's the 13th Amendment, where it goes back into a form of slavery. But with that being stated, we need more than just the families to come through, to be able to recognize what's going to say, what are we going to do? Just like those individuals march to the Capitol to get their rights back, if we're going to be a global society, a society that really has a level of humanity for all, understanding that these individuals come back into our society, then what we have to do is recognize, how do we really make it a rehabilitator? So not only does it take the families to be able to give the love, the letters, and the books that can help, but won't do it all by itself. It takes the allies, those who weren't allies, but now it's going to take a bigger push even from those elected officials, those who are afraid to work with inmates because they look like they're going to be soft on crime. I never understood that. You don't have to be soft on crime to be for rehabilitation. And my thing is, if we did a lot of stuff on the forefront, we wouldn't even have this. So now it goes into whether our politicians and elected officials, not only to make laws to make it better for those who are incarcerated at this period of time, but to create conditions so that we don't keep producing a lot of the inmates, because it's a lot of the social issues that help to create an environment that make it easier. We're not taking away accountability. We're not making excuses for individuals. What we're saying is, if you give me two choices and one looks a lot better for immediate gratification and I have immediate needs, the likelihood that that person would gravitate towards that is stronger. To overcome that, it takes a lot. And so when we start talking about this again, you say, what can we do? We got to make sure we send love, we send letters, we send books, but also we got to make sure that we advocate. And for those people who can, for myself, for you, for everybody, for Molly, everybody who's on the call, what we got to start doing is this: who can we contact that generally doesn't help out with this, who really didn't see this before, but maybe we could get a friend in? Because when we see those cases escalate, and you look at State Fair and you look at how they had to build a place right next to, I believe it was Franklin, to the House of Correction for the exploding and overload, now we start to see, hey, this is a dangerous position. And if it can't accommodate them in the midst of a pandemic, that means we probably need to overhaul this system overall. Because they're saying, hey, specifically with the virus, even if it's out of a point of pragmatic, not even out of your heart, but if we know that the coronavirus could come back in a hard second wave in the fall, we know that other viruses can splinter off of this, or just other ones that could be created somehow out like this one was or whatnot. We understand that what we lived in before is not going to be the same. And if we understand with social distancing, with masks, we need to make sure, just as Robin Voss was dressed on election day, that every inmate, every correctional officer had that same amount of PPE at the very least.
Indeed. And one thing also, so pre-COVID, the ACLU's campaign for smart justice was working to reduce our prison population, because we're currently sitting at over 23,000 people in our state prisons, and another 12,000 in our county jails, where you literally have people living on top of one another. So
got the boats out and everything.
Absolutely, they got the boats out, and so we didn't necessarily need a pandemic to let us know that we had a problem within our criminal legal system. I think what this pandemic has done, it has exacerbated the problem and has shown everyday, Wisconsinites, that there are men and women who are trapped in a cage and cannot walk outside of their door as freely as you can, but you are experiencing a little bit of what they are experiencing right now, and they need you to advocate on their behalf. And so that's what we've been working to do that's what we was working to do pre-COVID, and that's what we've been doing since COVID. But we're moving with a little bit more urgency, and we're asking folks to contact the governor, contact their sheriffs, contact the district attorneys, because we need these stakeholders and these individuals who have the power to make decisions and have an impact on the men and women's lives within the correctional facilities to do their job. Correctional health is public health, and this is what we're urging our elected officials to do. And that's why we're holding these town halls every day. And I'm glad that we have you on to talk about the mental health aspect, because many family members are wondering, how do they talk to their children about COVID-19? How do they stress to them why they need to stay in? And I know in Ohio, there's a story of a young man, I think his name was Hayden Hunstable. I believe he was 13 or 14 years old, and he committed suicide. Yeah. And his father attributed the stay-at-home order and the isolation as to why he believed his son committed suicide. And I my heart aches for that father, because my 4-year-old literally, pretty much yelled at my wife the other day and said, "I just want to go outside." I just want to play with someone. So what are some things, how can parents, speak with their children about COVID-19 as it may pertain to people they love being exposed or contracting the coronavirus?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a difficult question because obviously when we talk with little children, it's always going to be contingent upon their age. How I talk to a 5-year-old is going to be different to how I talk to a 10-year-old or a 14-year-old or 18-year-old, things of that nature. The first thing what we have to do is we have to be very honest with them. So many times as parents, we want to go into the Santa Claus fairy tale kind of syndrome to make it seem all good for them. We have to stop that. But what we have to do in our ability to tell the truth is to tell it to them at a level in which they can understand. You said, well, how can I understand? Because we don't be parents and adults and tell them what they need to know. We got to sit back and listen. And as they tell us, just like you talked about your son, no, you can't go. Do you know how dangerous? No, I don't know how dangerous it is. I just want to go outside and play something that I normally did. Why can't I do it now? I don't understand it. It's like, you see those old zombie movies with people who get infected and you can kind of understand why, but everybody looks the same. Everything looks the same visually. So for a young child, they're like, what is different? It feels like a punishment, like an extended timeout. So what you have to do is 3 things. 1, you have to listen to them. You have to listen to them. 2, you got to create a new type of normal that allows them to have that type of sanity. Because just like you said, just as COVID, the literal disease, can kill people, there's consequences for COVID. We see the economic consequences, how it's killing businesses, how it's killing people's personal finances. But the isolation, we are people. I haven't hugged my mom in 3 months almost. That's killing me. She comes by, I got to wave from 6 weeks with a mask on, feeling so weird. Because you say, I could go touch her, but you can't. So those are the things what we have to do with our children and say, this is why we can't. But then when we say we let them ask the questions, then we come back and explain what COVID is. Now I have children, 15, 11, 9. The 9-year-old will be 10 tomorrow. She's got to have a birthday, within the midst of the pandemic. But you know what I did with them? When we had to shut stuff down, I asked them, hey, do you understand what's going on? Of course they didn't. So what I started to do is, because they were a little older, I could talk to them literally about COVID. We had school, we had to become teachers. So guess what? That became a part of our weekly, our daily assignments. What can we do? Just a taste of it. We didn't, over bombard it, but we let them know just a little bit. And then what you do is you look for other options. CNN is doing a great thing with Sesame Street, where they have a town hall for children. And that's one of the most beautiful things that's out there, because now you get to hear children asking their questions and seeing what they say. And sometimes when we learn from other people, it's there. You see people writing books for children right now at this time, dealing with that. What we want to do is find every possible resource that we can. There are still individuals like myself that you can reach to virtually to be able to talk through some things, even though you can't be there physically there. But then one of the other things what we have to do is we have to recognize that is not normal and that it's got to be pain. So we have to be patient. We have to have a level of understanding that we normally wouldn't have, because they are there. And that goes to your point as far as with incarceration and mental health, how it deteriorates. You can see a person decompensate because I'm not there. Think about Brother Floyd yesterday. When he was dying, what did he say? I can't breathe. My neck hurts. My stomach hurts. My everything hurts. But what was his last words? Now, this was a big man that they call a gentle giant, but what was his last words? Mama, mama. Because it's something about the essence of the protection of a mother that you need. And so when we start talking about the mothers, the fathers, the caregivers, whether it's your grandmothers or whoever it may be, we got to make sure that we give them that amount of love. We got to make sure we let them, hey, go ahead, cry with me. Go ahead, you be, not naughty, but I understand that this behavior is not going to be perfect. And I'm going to not give you a pass so you think you can keep doing it, but I'm going to be more gentle with my disciplinary structures, with my punishment structures, understanding what's going on. Because as we think about this with those who are incarcerated, this is where it becomes real critical, because you're usually dealing with people with emotional arrested development. And that's why if you've ever been in prison or worked in a prison at night, you see grown men and women calling for their mama in the middle of the night. And it ain't nothing to be embarrassed about. It ain't nothing to be ashamed. It's when you're at your lowest of the lows and you need something to love you and protect you. And that's what you're thinking about. But what do we do in the prison? We take it away. We take away conjugal visits. We take away some of the visits where, you know, you can't even touch individuals. And what we do is we watch people decompensate. So some of the things that we've learned from people becoming institutionalized, we got to learn from this so our children don't become institutionalized in a sense. So when we do come back to some type of normal where we can get together, they understand, how do I do certain things? So what do? We make sure that those who we are with, we can give love. I give extra hugs. I give extra kisses. So the ones that they can't get it from, that they get it. What else do? We make sure through the beautiful, if you have the ability, through FaceTime, through Skype or Zoom or whatever it may be, to be able to make sure you're staying in contact. I'm also having them write letters to individuals. On Memorial Day, we went by my mom's and my stepdad's, and they wrote a letter to a big sign for my grandfather, my stepfather, said, "Thank you for your service," and they saluted him. And I could see the look on his face. But the look that they got, knowing what they did for him, is what it is. So it's like right now, and this is really if everybody is listening, this is the main thing I want us all to get tonight. So if there's a sweet part of what I'm saying where you talk about a movie and this is the climax, this is it. Whenever we talk about people elevating to another level, they hit these liminal periods of time. You know, we talk about rites of passage, just like where you're in society, you're taken away, and when you're taken away, you get this knowledge, you get this lesson, and then you reintegrate it back to where you're at as a bigger, better person. See, that's what prison was supposed to be, this liminal time, a time to think, have self-introspection, to gain myself, to get better, to learn the areas of my ways, to learn how to help, to learn how to be a healer, and then come out and be a bigger help to my community in ways in which I used to harm and hurt it. But right now, we're all in this kind of liminal period. We're in a place that we don't want to be, that we're not here. And I work for the Badgers, and when I work with the athletes specifically, I tell them this time is going to do three things to you, and it's clear. Either as an athlete, you're going to get worse, you're going to stay the same, or you're going to get better. Now, those who say, "Hey, this pandemic is hard, I'm not motivated, I can't do it," all understandable. But we still got consequences, and there's still the results at the end. And if you can't muster what you need, you get worse. Some people are going to be able to just barely scratch and hang on, and when they come out of this, they're going to be able to say, "You know what? No losses, no gains." But then it's those who attack this moment aggressively, proactively, and say, "This is not what I wanted, but you know what? I'm going to counter it, and I'm going to see how I can get better from it." Not denying the pain, not denying the hurt, not denying the frustration. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build myself. And you know this, Brother Sean, it's a moment when you locked up where you go from being just craziness up inside of here till it clicks. And you be like, "This ain't what I want. I got to do something different. I got to do something better." And then you start to see the switch and the change. And they say, "Oh, that's the one right here." When he gets out, when she gets out, she got a chance because you could see it click. But the question is, what's the surrounding support? Because when you're in those kind of liminal states, we all need a guide. We all need a teacher. So just as a parent, now we got to be the guide to that child. For us as adults, that guide could be a book. It could be a podcast. It could be somebody else. It could be a religious figure or whatnot, the motivational person that helps you to say, "Hey, I'm not denying the pain, but you know what? I'm going to face this." They said, if you want to build mountains tomorrow, start by moving stones today. So just doing those little bitty things every day, because the people who are going to come out of this better, those are the people who are creative, who have a level of ingenuity, a level of stick-to-itiveness, a level of tenacity and perseverance that said, despite the odds, I'm going to make this. I'm winning regardless. In fact, I'm going to use this to propel me. You think about America being a capitalistic society. This is the one time where you see people get creative because they say, "How can I make a buck?" We look at the face mask. You had the little N95 mask, cost $3.95. Well, now I put Wisconsin on it. I put Ohio State on it. I put a fraternity symbol. I put a skull and mask. Now I'm selling it for $25. We see the creativity from that from a capitalistic standpoint. How can we have that creativity for the inner soul? And I'm telling everybody, we're all in this kind of period right now. And the question is, how do we grow? Now, if we're saying we need all of this right here for us to grow because we don't want to get worse or even stay the same, how much more for our individuals who are incarcerated, who are in a purposeful liminal state where we're saying, we want you to get better. So the question is, what are we giving them? And if we're the situation we're putting them in, are we making them worse? Or are we even keeping them sane? Because if we keeping them sane, that means they're going to recidivate because the mind hasn't changed. What we got to do is do something extra special to make it that they get better. So when you come out, it's a whole different thing. And what we got to do, even on top of that, is create situations proactively so we don't have to rehabilitate anybody. We want to be able to raise healthy young men and young women that can be vibrant and productive from the beginning of their days. So when we start to think about those things, what I tell people is this is a critical period. While we're in here, the question to yourself that you got to pose. The Stoics say, and Socrates would say, that unexamined life is a life that's not worth living. So you got to ask yourself every day, how do I get better? When everybody wonder how the Bucks are so great where they're at, well, I got a great chance to work for the Bucks when Herb Cole sold the Bucks to the 3 owners. It was 2 at the time. But when they brought Jason Kidd in, he said, I got to change this culture because it's a losing culture in Milwaukee. And what he challenged every player, every coach, everybody affiliated with the organization was, he said, how do you get better every day? Because if you get better every day in a week, think about where you're going to be. Then in a month, think about where you're going to be. And I'm proud to say the first year that I came at the end, it was a 15-win season. By the next semester, by the next year, we had won 30 games before the All-Star break. No team had ever doubled their win total before the All-Star break in the history of the league, but it was a mindset. It wasn't like we had all-stars. Giannis wasn't playing like Giannis was now, but it was a belief in the people of what could be done, what they could do, and they overachieved till they started to believe it, and then they were just playing at the level that they were capable. And what I'm telling us what we have to do is this. It's not noble to be superior to your next man. What is noble is to be superior to the man or the woman who you were yesterday. And that's what we got to think about. How do I become better? And if I'm a parent, how do I make my child better? If I'm a legislator, if I'm a community member, and I talk about the people incarcerated, what am I doing to make them better? Instead of just talking about them, instead of just ignoring the problem, what am I doing to help solve the problem? When I wake up in the morning, I look for 3 ways to get better in my mind, my body, and my soul. But I look at how can I improve myself? That's the mind, body, and soul. How can I improve my family, my community, and then the world globally as an example? I'm not saying everybody has to do that per se, but you got to get something in your mind where you are intentional about how I'm going to move my day, but it can't be just selfish about you. It's got to be how can I help others also. And once we do that, we get a global humanity that puts a lot of ease to a lot of these issues we're dealing with.
Absolutely. And just real briefly before I tag my colleague to ask some questions that we're receiving off of Facebook. One thing I tell a lot of folks, is that I got out of prison mentally before I got out physically. And because I got out of prison mentally before I got out physically, I was able to come out and do the work that I'm currently doing leading up to my release from prison. But one thing that this COVID-19 or this lockdown has allowed me to do is to get back to how I used to be in prison, which was studying intensely. It has allowed me to get back to my studies the way that I was when I was incarcerated. So this lockdown has contributed a great deal to, my ongoing growth and my process of becoming a better individual, a better father, husband, and ultimately community member so that I can be able to have an impact on the world in which we're living in. So with that,
Hey, Sean, let me say this real quick because what you said was so powerful. Sometimes we say, I can't wait to get back to the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
But what this liminal period has taught us is that some of the old normal was dysfunctional. And right here, we are getting some things that's better. So the question is, how do we continue these things when it does return somewhat that are improving you? And that's a beautiful statement. Powerful, brother. Powerful.
Absolutely. EU, I know it's a few questions that you've been receiving. You wanna shoot those out?
Absolutely. I just want to preface it first by thanking you again, Dr. Smith. You're receiving an incredible amount of love on the maybe 11 Facebook channels we've got this shared. Outrageous, and a sea of emojis. On the other hand, we've got some very powerful questions folks are asking, and I think we have time to share 3 before we jump into the bit about the petition and the actions listeners can take. The first one links directly to something you were saying. It comes from a viewer in the Oshkosh area, Kim Ann, who says there have been many incarcerated folks in Oshkosh Correctional threatening suicide due to the mental health effects and how they feel very disrespectful staff is treating them. They're very depressed knowing that they could be and that they are currently exposed to what could be life-threatening illness. how can we as family members, as friends, as loved ones of individuals who are incarcerated, strengthen them so that they are not feeling the grip of suicidal thoughts?
Yeah. And this is that, like I said, it goes to the hard one and back to what we had talked about. So thanks for prefacing that from that point, Emilio. The correctional officers are under just as much stress as the inmates. And what we see with the correctional officers is that there's a displacement because there's a power differential. So the feelings of frustration they have from having to work double shifts, from having to be an essential worker, not being taken care of too, because they're not being taken care of either. And we're seeing the manifestation of that negativity, of that frustration, of that harshness upon the people who we love who are currently incarcerated. You said, what can we do? Well, we can't send them love. Let them know that somebody cares. When you're in and somebody puts some money on your books, somebody sends you a letter, somebody gives you a call, it means more than what you can imagine. And it could be just at that time where this is the night where I say, I'm not going to do it. Brenda Wesley, a great friend of mine, tells a story about a young man who was about to commit suicide. And he said, if one person smiles at me on my way home, I won't commit suicide. And he says, on my way home, one person smiled, and that was just enough that they needed. So we never know what little thing that we do might be the hump just to help make them through the day. And what we got to do is to give them hope. The number one reason why people commit suicide is because of hopelessness. And so that's a state of depression. When I believe that tomorrow will be worse than today, and today was the worst day of my life already, what reason do I have to live? And if it was dealing with a horse that broke his leg or a dog that was older and cancer, we call it euthanasia, we call it merciful. So when we look upon suicide within the West specifically, it's always looked upon as a negative connotation. Sometimes people look at it and say, I want to get out of this misery. When you look at most people who commit suicide, it's usually elderly white men. And that's because it's some type of chronic pain, but also for the first time in their life, they're not on top because they're receiving discrimination in a way they never had because of ageism, because of a loss of identity with retiring and whatnot like that. And it becomes overwhelming. So what can we do for our people there? We got to flood them with love. We got to flood them with hope. So the question is, it can't just be from mama. That hope's got to come from other places, because this is the thing. A preacher used to say this to me. He said, I don't care how much you care if you can't do nothing for me. If you can't do nothing, I know you care, but you can't do nothing. I need somebody who care and who can. So that's why so many times we see individuals who are incarcerated become extremely spiritual, where they'll pull up on a God because that gives them a hope to believe in. If that's an avenue you have, definitely help to reinforce their faith. For our brothers who might be, and sisters who might be agnostics or atheists, what we got to do is to give them a hope, a passion, and a purpose. And this is really what the key is with hope. When you look at individuals and you look through any of the analytics of time, and the times of people who we love, who we care about, who we respect, and who we revere, you look at a Gandhi, you look at a King, you look at a Jesus, you look at a Mother Teresa, you look at a Joan of Arc, you look at a Harriet Tubman, you look at people who were willing to literally give their lives, if not physically give their life, give the essence of their whole lives serving others, because that's the essence of human beings. So now what we have to do is give individuals hope on how, even though you may be incarcerated, as Brother Sean said, physically, you don't have to be incarcerated mentally. And now that you have this ability and this power, what can you do from this cell that nobody thought you could do from, but still make a difference in the world? What we got to do is give them hope, a power, a purpose, a mission. Because once I have a mission, guess what? I'm not looking for suicide. I'm not willing. I'm okay to give my life, but I'm not going to take my life because I got a bigger mission. And then when my life is taken, I can live with it because I did what I was supposed to do. So oftentimes our people who are incarcerated are felt like they're nothing because they are dropped down and they're treated less than humane. They're treated not even like an other, less than an other. And that can work on you, that can build on you. So we have to counter that. But then also with that, like I said, we have to get help for those correctional officers. We talk about mental health for the inmates. We need correctional mental health for those who are serving them so that they can better serve them and be those guides that we talk about. And it starts from the top. So once it comes from the top that we're going to do something different, it's great. I get a chance to travel around the country with my business and do different things. And I had a contract out in DC with their youth development center. And when I went out there, the administrator over all youth corrections amazed me. He said, he had every correctional officer in here. He said, listen, I know how things was done. They kind of had a Lincoln Hill situation. Theirs was called Oak Hill. And then they changed it into New Beginnings. He said, we're going to show people in corrections what love looks like. And I mean, that blew me away. This man was talking about love with correctional officers. It wasn't about discipline. It wasn't about the whole. It wasn't about all of these discriminations. It's about what can we give you to make you feel good. We look globally. We look at other correctional facilities over in Europe, and we say, oh, look at these little country clubs and whatnot. That's how a place should look. And when people come out, they say, hey, I've been civilized. I've been humanized in a way that this cruel world didn't allow me to be, and now I'm able to go. The place that we send them should not be better. So just like we just built a new stadium for the Brewers and for the Bucks, we have to do what? We have to build better prisons. We have to build better correctional facilities. When they go in there, they should have the latest of the latest. They should be doing the great things. And we have to make sure that the jobs that they get, they not just jail rich, but they can become rich with true labor. Minimum wage should be in the prisons also. So those men that's got to send child support, they can send real money home. Because if I'm doing that and I'm like the way, but I can still give something, oh, how much more did that make me feel that I'm being productive? We have to try to humanize this in a way in which we've never thought before. People's like, minimum wage for prisoners, like that's out of this world. Well, why wouldn't we give them that if they do a fair as day, honest wage of work? Why should anybody have to work for 28 cents or 33 cents or be happy that they're making $1.02? That's insane. So when we start talking about what can we do, what we got to do is make sure the little things we can do, we give them, but we also advocate for those who care and who can, for those of us who care, but can't really affect the change immediately for them.
Fantastic. And the depth of your response also answered a couple of the other questions.
Yeah, I'm long-winded. You got to forgive me. You got to forgive me.
No, that's good. And hopefully, Rufus, that answered some of what you were asking. And Carlos, we'll get back to you with a couple more specifics on that. I did want to ask you also, you're a wealth of information. You're sharing a lot of great and inspiring messages here. And we have been working to update COVID-19 resources to serve people in a variety of ways. Where can our listeners go to find out some of this information? It's inspiring, and you're inspiring the audience listening now, and we will, of course, share this video for free. But do you have any resources that folks can check in at every now and then when they need to re-up on Dr. Smith?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, I'm on social media and everything like that. I have a YouTube channel. As the brother Sean said, I had a television show called The Unspeakable Truth. We had to put it on pause when I took the position with Wisconsin just because of time. But I try to put out different, what I call blacksmithisms. That's the name of my business, Blacksmith. Like just little positive quotes a day. But you know what? I'm a big fan like everybody else. I love to read. I love to watch YouTube, inspirational videos. I'm a big fan of understanding that a podcast. And I'm a big fan also of meditation, of mindfulness, of prayer, of how do I get this self-time to slow down, to think. But as it relates specifically just to my work, blacksmith.com has a plethora of places you could go to get some of my information. I wrote a book called Building a Better Man, and I wrote that with William Seymour and Hector Torres. And in that book, what we tried to do literally was to talk about how can you become better. And even though it say, how do you become a better man, it's very applicable to women also. So I think that's probably one of the best pieces I can send people to. You can get it off of Amazon. That's not it's a shameless plug, but really I think it's something beneficial, because when we first wrote it, literally, it was for 12 to 17-year-olds. We were doing groups at Children's Hospital, but it had such a level of generalizability. We worked it in the correctional facilities, and then we started working it with advanced level degrees businessmen, and we saw it had the same thing. We changed the terminology, but the essence of it was the same, and it was 3 points, the 3 I's: intrapersonal skills, interpersonal skills, and involvement. Intrapersonal, how do I love myself? How do I build myself up? Because as I build myself up, now how do I increase my interpersonal skills, my relationships with my family, with my friends, with the community at large? And 3, the involvement piece. How do I serve something greater than myself? Some of the things I talked about, I wrote about, I try to also include in my life. So even if you don't hear me just thinking about those things, how can I build myself up? How can I build relationships up? And how can I do something for others, specifically those who can't do something back for me? So I know it's out truly the goodness of my heart.
Thank you so much. And I just want to clarify before we get to a couple of points of information. It's Blacksmith, BLAQUESMITH.
Yes, sir.
And the name of the book was again?
Building a Better Man.
Building a Better Man. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause for a second to shift gears to just talk about 2 articles of action that we can do before flipping the mic back over to Sean. Currently, we have two statewide initiatives that we'd like all of our listeners to continue engaging in and getting their friends and family involved in. The first of which is a petition demanding that the governor decarcerate and take the necessary steps to make sure that our brothers and sisters and loved ones who are currently incarcerated can be sent home, because they do not need to languish in an area where social distancing is impossible, where hand sanitizer is viewed as contraband, and where folks who are, as you indicated, also suffering trauma, but are now in this role of being a guard, are not necessarily listening to or obeying the CDC recommendations or even the recommendations from the Department of Corrections. Knowing this, and knowing that Secretary Carr and the governor and many other people hear this on a daily basis, as was indicated by one of our listeners, Carlos King, we need folks to go home if they can, and they should. So I'm going to share the links to the petitions that are there. And additionally, we have spoken a lot on prisons, but the jails are no better. And there are thousands and thousands of people in the 72 Wisconsin County jails who should go home, who need to go home, and whose very presence there during this exposure, as we saw in Kenosha, are also affecting all the deputies and the corrections folks that come in contact with them, that may not be wearing personally protective equipment because they don't have it, because they're on Facebook doing fund drives for it, or because they're too macho for it, and then bringing that home and infecting their loved ones. And that is completely unnecessary. And I'm going to share a sheriff's toolkit that Sean, Molly, Melissa, and I, as well as our other statewide organizers, have put together with a sample letter that we ask all of our listeners to send their sheriffs. The sheriffs are elected folks. They're going to listen to you as their constituent. Ask a couple of neighbors. You don't have to be a wordsmith. You just have to send the email and ask them to do the right thing, which is to send all of these folks that are incarcerated unnecessarily home, so that they have a chance at survival as well. I got to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Doctor. It's been really inspirational, and I'm going to pop it back over to Sean.
Respect, Emilio. Appreciate that, brother.
Thank you, Emilio. And I echo what Emilio just said. Dr. Smith, I appreciate you. As you know, you my brother, and you always definitely come with it. And just also, the cues, brother Dr. Smith's fraternity is in support of the Smart Justice campaign. So I appreciate you all support. They presented me with a resolution last year in support of our campaign. So the Omega Psi Phi fraternity is in support of criminal legal reform here in the state of Wisconsin, as well as throughout the country. So I thank you for that support. I thank the Qs as a whole for that support. I thank you for everything that you spoke on tonight. I'm sure you have given our viewers a lot of hope. You definitely have given me a lot of hope. And we appreciate you, brother. So thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. And to our viewers, please join us next week for our town hall. We will be having a conversation with recently released brother Ahmad Michael LaRue, who was just released from prison after serving 22 years in prison. He went in at the age of 15, and he has rejoined us today. I was there to see him released. And the smile that was on his face when he walked out of the prison, the first thing that came out of his mouth was, "Is this what freedom feels like? I need to get me a mask." So join us next week to hear a conversation with this brother on how he's feeling, what has his experience been like, and how folks can continue to support the efforts to release men, women, and children who are within our correctional facilities throughout the state, as well as throughout the country. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope that you will share this and that you will continue to support our efforts as we go forward and reducing our prison population and reforming our criminal legal system. Thank you, and you all have a great rest.